Before we talk about the specifics of different kinds of joints, I want to give you a framework for how to think about the way we approximate and model different parts of the body when we try and solve problems in health or in sports. One misconception that I think people have about science generally and human performance and biomechanics research in particular is that they think that we're always trying to search for the most perfect possible explanation for something, when really what we're usually doing is trying to find what's a reasonable approximation that allows us to make a good understanding of what's going on. A good example that we'll always return to is the knee joint, because in the last video, for example, we talked about the knee as if it was like a perfect hinge. It just had one angle that opened and closed. As we'll see, that is maybe not the best model for some situations. If you're trying to think about, for example, how the ACL ligament functions, that might not be a model that's sufficiently complex to capture the ideas that we're trying to think about. But if all you care about is, say, what's the action of the quadriceps muscles during a squat or a deadlift, a simple model like that might be pretty good. One of the questions we'll always return to is, how valid are the assumptions we're making about the body? Quite often we treat segments of the body, like the thigh or the shin, like they're just one rigid segment. And usually that's a pretty good approximation because bones are really stiff, really tough. But if you were modeling, say, amputee gait and your prosthetic limb had some spring in it that was squishing up and down, treating their leg as if it was a perfectly rigid object might not be the best approximation. Maybe a more extreme example would be if you were doing work at a zoo looking at the trunk of an elephant, right? Now that's articulated by muscles, but it doesn't have any bones inside it at all. So treating that as a set of rigid segments, probably not a very good idea. So as we talk about different kinds of joints and ideas about degrees of freedom, just remember that these ways of modeling the body are a tool for us to help understand the body and try to make some good predictions and understand the phenomena that we see every day. Sometimes a really simple model works really well. Other times we'll need to move to something more complex. Generally, we want to use the simplest model that explains whatever it is that we see out in the world. Usually somebody will explain, some phenomenon that we see, and then we'll propose a simple model to it. And then if we realize that we collect some more data or we see a new situation, we might make that model more complex to accommodate new situations that we're unfamiliar with before. So just remember that every model is an approximation. Sometimes they're useful. Sometimes we need to make them more complicated to explain what we see in the world. So keeping that in mind will help you determine what are the situations where our assumptions are valid and what are the situations where they're not so valid.